Hey everybody, welcome back to A Matter of Life and Maiden, the podcast of the Beast. I am Joe Labriola, and today this is episode 39 of the podcast. And in the previous episode, 38, about a month ago, roughly, it was around Dave Murray's birthday, and I posted the episode in regards to Davey. So today I want to continue down that trajectory, and it's Mr. Janick Robert Gers' 68th birthday. He was born on January 27th, 1957, so 68 years of age. So him and Davey aren't that far apart, really. A little over a month. And so Yan's a little bit younger. And then we'll talk about Adrian next month because his birthday's coming up in the 20s of February. So we'll get to him. But I'm gonna have some more episodes in between. It's just the new year started, things got busy, and I didn't really get around to record what I wanted to. I'm kind of one episode behind, really, on what I wanted to record, but I'll be throwing that up here pretty soon. But a happy New Year, everybody out there too. Listen to the podcast. Happy 2025. I hope it's going well so far. So far for me, it's not been too bad. New Year, it's exciting. So hopefully we get some good changes and some positive stuff coming our way this year. And obviously 2025 is a year for Maiden too, and the Run for Your Lives tour. So we'll see how that goes. But I digress. Today is about Mr. Janick Gers, as I mentioned. And man, 68 years old. It's crazy. But I kind of want to start off and talk about Jan and how he's been in my life and influenced my life. I know Matt and I have kind of subtly talked about this throughout the podcast when we were recording our first couple episodes, and we talked about Jan to a certain extent. When Matt and I got into Iron Maiden, we didn't really know anything, and like I said, I've said this a bunch of times in the podcast. Back in the early 2000s when we became fans, there wasn't all this technology that there is now, where you could see what the guys look like and watch interviews on YouTube and see, pretty much every facet of their life. Like you type in now, like Janick Gers interview, and you can find, I don't know, days and days and days of material, weeks of material on what the guy sounds like, what he looks like, who he's played with, concert footage, all this other stuff. YouTube was like in the very early stages in the early 2000s when we became fans of Iron Maiden, and it was very minimal to what you could find. You had to research things on forums, and you had to look through stuff. You actually had to do research. Like we sat there for hours on end, days on end, trying to find things out. So it was different. So, with that being said, when we were getting into Maiden too, like I said, we got into Maiden around 04, 05. Like that was when we got into them, like 20 some years ago, like a little over 20 years ago, going on 21 years ago. So for us, it was a thing where we didn't really know what these guys looked like. Now I'll say this. When I watched Rock in Rio for the first time and I saw Jan and the guys performing as a six-piece, I was blown away. I thought it was amazing. But then, as a new metal guitarist, because I had just got into playing guitar, I just got into metal, and I was like, metal, metal, metal. Who's the cream of the crop in this band? And then I started listening to the early stuff, like I said, and you go back and you realize, like, at that point in time, I loved The Matter of Life and Death, and I loved, like, Brave New World. But then I went back and I really, really started to latch on to the 80s material, like the classic Iron Maiden lineup, like the golden era from 82 to 88, that era. And then I realized that Jan wasn't even in the band when they recorded those records. So, in my mind at that point in time, I was like, some of the greatest music ever made, in my opinion. And to this day, they're my favorite band. In my opinion, it's the greatest music ever made, that 82 to 88 period. He wasn't part of it. So it was like, why is he even in the band? I remember Matt and I saying to ourselves, like, why is Janick even in this band? And then when we started to research and figure out what albums he was on, it was like he was on No Prayer and Fear the Dark and The X Factor and Virtual 11. He had four really, mediocre or lackluster albums at the beginning of the career. And at that point in time, the only two albums that were out were Brave New World and Dance of Death from the reunion. So it was like, why is he even in this band? But I'll be honest, when A Matter of Life and Death came out and exploded, and I latched on that album, we started researching that and figuring out who wrote what, and really, really researching and getting the full picture of it instead of being like ignorant to the fact that Jan was in the band and that he hadn't, quote unquote, contributed like the other guys, because we were just, really young in our late teens, early 20s, and But I'll tell you what, when we really started diving in and doing research with A Matter of Life and Death and listening to the crap out of that record and seeing what Yan had contributed to that, some of our favorite tunes from that record were written by Yan. We were like, damn, he's pretty damn good. But even then, we were like, yeah, he only has a couple writing credits. It wasn't really solidified, to be honest, until The Final Frontier came out and we saw his writing chops. And then we had seen them on Somewhere Back in Time, and we had seen them on the Final Frontier North American tour. Then at that point, it was like, okay, yeah, we love Yan just as much. But it took us a while, I'm not going to lie. But with that being said, moving forward, to elaborate kind of what I just said about like the first 4 albums he was on, after Adrian left, after Seven Son and Yan came in 1990, he was on No Prayer for the Dying, and he doesn't have any writing credits on that album. Now, when you think about that and you look at it, you're like, well, we used to blame Yan for it, like, oh, it's Yan's fault, the album's bad, he doesn't have any. But the reality of the situation is, looking back on it more maturely now and more educated about it, was Adrian had just left the band. They were in the middle of a writing process. They were running out of ideas. They were drying up. They knew they needed to release an album. They bring Yan in because he had played with Bruce on Tattooed Millionaire, on Bruce's solo record. And he played with Ian Gillan from Deep Purple, when Deep Purple's a huge influence for all those guys in Iron Maiden. So it was kind of a perfect fit, so to speak, in terms of having a guy who was that close to them, location-wise, also with a similar interest, because all these guys love Ritchie Blackmore. Now, Yan in particular loved Ritchie, and he also loved Roy Gallagher, and he also loved Jeff Beck from the Yardbirds. That was one of his influences. So, and you can kind of see that in his playing. He has a very wild, kind of like carefree play about him. It's very improvisational, like I talked about before. Now, while it's not my favorite, as I said, I prefer Adrian and Dave's playing, more. Yan is definitely a part of this band, and he brings something different. And when I talk about him today for his birthday, I'm going to tell you, maybe not actual technique-wise, I would say he's as refined as Davey or Adrian. And I said this on Davey's podcast. Davey is pure legato speed. He is unbelievable. He's amazing that way. And he's very solid and concise and precise. He's a speed, pure guitar player. He has some writing credits throughout, the Iron Maiden catalog, but Davey's strong suit is not writing. Davey's strong suit is playing. Davey's strong suit is playing guitar. The reason I like Adrian the most is because his strong suit is playing guitar and writing, and that's kind of where I come from. I like to write lyrics and I like to play, because I sing too. I have a very similar background to Adrian. Like I sing, I play guitar, I do those things. And, even to compare Matt and I to these guitarists, Matt was more of a pure guitarist. He wasn't really a guy who was going to write lyrics or do that much stuff. That was usually me, because I was the one singing the stuff and writing the things. I'm more like Adrian. He's more like Dave. And then we never really got to that place where we were like Yan, right? I think that's another reason why, to a certain extent, maybe he didn't really click with us in the beginning, because I found a niche in Adrian that I tried to emulate, and he found a niche in Dave that he tried to emulate, and that's kind of where we fell. And then later we started to appreciate Yan. Like I said, the more and more we grew up and matured, got into the music, discovered things about these guys, saw them live, we appreciated them more. Now, to Yan's credit, with everything said, no credits on No Prayer. He was just coming into the band, much like Adrian when he joined the band with Killers. He didn't really have a lot of writing credits. It was like, hey, this new guitarist is in the band. We're going to try him out. We're going to get him a gel with us. We already have kind of like a concept created. We don't really need his input. He's the new guy, quote unquote, right? So No Prayer didn't have a lot of stuff. No writing credits at all from Yan, actually. Nothing. And it was all pretty much the rest of the guys in the band. Primarily Steve, with some input from Bruce, a little bit from Davey, like maybe 1 or 2 songs, but really nothing else. It was really just Bruce and Steve on that, and it was not a good record. There's not really many memorable songs on it, memorable hooks, memorable solos that I can think of. And that's another reason when you think of Yan, you're like, well, there's nothing really great about No Prayer. Now, to fast forward from No Prayer and go to Fear of the Dark, this is where Yan has some writing credits. He has like 4 or 5 writing credits on this album. Now, I will say most of them, in my opinion, aren't the greatest writing credits. The best thing he has on this record for me is Be Quick or Be Dead, that he wrote with Bruce. And that's a really good riff and a really good place where you can kind of see his maturation slowly starting to mature. There's other ones on there, Weekend Warrior, Wasting Love, Fear is the Key, some other stuff. But like, it's not that great. Like I said, when you think of those songs, you don't think when you think of the Fear the Dark album, you're not thinking of those songs really. You're thinking of Be Quick or Be Dead. You're thinking of Fear the Dark. You're thinking of Afraid to See Strangers. The stuff that Maiden is kind of known for nowadays. They had a little bit of that on Fear the Dark. Now, the difference then Bruce. And another thing about Jan is he came into the band in like a really crappy time for metal. It was the '90s. Like alternative rock and grunge had taken over, and unfortunately, metal was on the back burner. They weren't playing metal on the radio. They weren't playing anything, and Maiden really hasn't been radio friendly, so to speak, at all throughout their entire career. But in order to get somebody into that, playing things similar to kind of fall into things, I mean, it just wasn't being played. It wasn't popular. It wasn't what people wanted to hear, and Jan, unfortunately, like I said, came in at a kind of a bad time for the band. So a slower start for Jan than Adrian had. And after Fear of the Dark, like I said, X Factor comes, and he has like 7 writing credits on the X Factor. Jan does. Lord of the Flies he wrote, which is the best song I think he helped write on this record. He helped Blaze write Man on the Edge, Edge of Darkness, The Aftermath, songs like that. Then, there's a couple in there I don't really care for, like 2 AM and some of the other songs, but those ones are really, really decent for this record. And this is where, in my opinion, he's really starting to come into his own and find himself. And you can see flourishes of it on Fear of the Dark, like the melodic kind of minstrelly sound of Fear of the Dark. And then you go towards like Sign of the Cross and stuff like that, and the slower kind of melodic atmospheric stuff with that. Jan is a master at that, and you'll see later when we talk about some of the songs that he writes. After X Factor, then we got the last record with Blaze before he gets kicked out of the band, and Bruce comes back for the reunion. I think Jan only has like 1 writing credit on Virtual 11, and that's Como Estes Amigos, which again is a more melodic kind of atmospheric song. So it's different. It's a different sounding song. And I think after, those 4 albums of him kind of just experimenting and seeing how he would fit into this band, he kind of started to develop this sound. Now, he always had that flashiness and like prancing around the stage and dancing. He always had that. But then when it came to the actual playing pieces and what his strengths would be, especially after Adrian comes back into the band with Brave New World in 1999 and Bruce rejoins, that's when he really finds his place among the other 2 guitar players. And on Brave New World, he writes some of the tastiest. I mean, honestly, Brave New World is like his album out of the guitarist. I think he has the most writing credits. He has like 4 writing credits in this. Ghost of the Navigator is absolutely phenomenal. Just the way he plays it, the galloping, the rhythm, the vividness, the wildness. And with him there, Brave New World's a very special album because it's the first album with all 3 guitarists. And when you listen to Brave New World, I don't know if we mentioned this in the podcast, but if you listen to it and you kind of compare it even to the golden era stuff in the 80s, which, like I said, is absolutely amazing to me, and I love the reunion era stuff too, don't get me wrong, but it's a different band. The 6-piece is different, and I think it was the most genius move by, the guys in the band and management and Rod and whoever to say, we're keeping 3 guitarists, and Bruce is coming back, because they are the only band who has done that, like a rock band. I mean, when you're looking back to some of their influences, a lot of the guys that they've looked up to only had 1 pure guitarist in their band. Deep Purple, for instance, Richie Blackmore. Rainbow, same thing, Richie Blackmore, 1 guitarist. Now, a lot of these guys had keyboards in their bands too to kind of complement, but we're talking about pure guitarists. I even look at like Ronnie Dio. Dio had 1 guitar player in his bands. Even when he played with Sabbath, or they were playing with As Heaven and Hell, and like I mentioned Rainbow already, 1 guitarist, Richie Blackmore, Tony Iommi, that was it, and maybe a keyboard player. But like, you're talking about the double axe tandem with the original Maiden idea and the original Judas Priest idea, and that comes from Argus, like Steve's influence and stuff like that. But then to take that and then add another layer with a 3rd guitarist, I mean, that's pretty amazing, and that's, you can see from the reunion forward where Jan fits in and where he brings his talent to this band. And Matt and I have said this before on the podcast. The songs from the reunion onward, from Brave New World to the present, Senjutsu, and whatever's going to come after, they cannot play any of those songs on those records without 3 guitarists. It is designed to be for these three guys, and they incorporate the characteristics and the differences, which is why it's amazing. And I think that's why, to a certain extent, too, at the beginning with Yan, Matt and I weren't really hooked on him because his sound wasn't honed yet. It was a dark time for heavy metal. The albums that they were churning out weren't that great because they were running out of creative ideas and juice. You figure you're working with Adrian for almost 10 years. That's a 10-year rapport of somebody who knows how to play guitar with Davey, who knows how to write lyrics with Steve and Bruce, and then he's gone. And you're trying to bring this new guy in, and to their credit, they tried to make him comfortable. But as you can see, there was definitely a hurdle there until they all reunited, put their differences aside, and then they all became the six-piece Iron Maiden, which I said this before is my Iron Maiden. The six-piece Iron Maiden of Bruce Dickinson, Steve Harris, Nico McBrain, Dave Murray, Adrian Smith, and Janick Gers. That is my Iron Maiden, and always will be. I can go back and I can love the 80s stuff too, and I can realize that was Iron Maiden at the time. But for me, this is my Iron Maiden. And I've said this before. After the Run for Your Lives tour is over, I really do hope they play another tour for a year or two where they play stuff from the reunion to the present and whatever the next album may be, if we get one. Because I do think, like I'm saying here, that catalog is just as good, if not in some places better than the 80s stuff. And I'm not saying that their new music is better than the 80s stuff, because it's a different band. It's like a classic heavy metal appreciation for that stuff versus this new resurgence of heavy metal after the 90s ended and the early 2000s came, and it's just a different band. It's a different band. They're so much more mature. Their content's better, and I can't wait, and I hope that is the case. I hope they do a reunion to the present tour after Run for Your Lives. Then, trying to piggyback off of what I'm saying for the reunion tour, these are the reasons why, and Yan is a part of that. And when I talk about this, I'm kind of going to go back to it again, because this is what Yan brings to this band. And like I said, this episode isn't really so much on his guitar playing per se, but if you're a fan of Iron Maiden, you know that he brings a certain energy to the band that the other guys, they bring their own energy, but it's different from the other guys. It's way, he's so energetic. I think that the two guys that run around the most in the band are probably Bruce and Yan. Steve does a little bit too. Davey and Adrian don't really run around that much. Obviously, Nick goes back at the drums, so he's not running anywhere, right? He's playing the drums for these things. And we're going to have, the new guy Simon playing for the Run for Your Lives. But Yan is a very energetic piece of this band, and the stuff that he does, spinning his guitar around, throwing his guitar up in the air, bending his guitar back. His showmanship is unbelievable. He's very extravagant, very over the top, very wild. And that's what he brings to this band. That's the additional dimension that he brings. And I think to a certain extent, and don't get me wrong, Yan is a hell of a guitar player too. I'm not trying to diminish the man. I'm not trying to knock him down. I just don't think that the guitar playing that he does is my favorite out of these guys. But he does do some amazing melody, rhythm, very cool introductory work, and interlude work and things like that. And he's amazing at it. He's the one up there doing the Irish jig and dancing around and stuff with Steve and Bruce and being the wild one. But Brave New World, for instance, Ghost of the Navigator couldn't have been written without Yan. Dream of Mirrors couldn't have been written without Yan. The Mercenary couldn't have been written without Yan. Out of the Silent Planet couldn't have been written without Yan. And when you think of those songs and what they bring to that record as a whole, that's Yan. But you can also see the kind of style then that emerges from his first 4 Learning Experience albums in No Prayer for the Dying, Fear of the Dark, The X Factor, and Virtual 11 to the reunion, and where he really, really fits into a niche. And then what happened is when Adrian came back, it was Adrian's first time in the band. It was almost like a flip-flop, because Yan had been in the band at that point then for almost 10 years, where Adrian had been in the band before for 10 years. So Adrian only had like 2 writing credits on Brave New World. When he really found his really over the top, like solidified niche somewhere in time. And I would argue that Yan found his really solidified place with Brave New World. But then at that point in time, Adrian had come back into the band. So, and you needed him back in the band because it's just how things worked. It's how the album's constructed, how it went. So, Yan kind of sacrificed himself, so to speak, to be this shining guitar player. He very well could have turned into the next Adrian Smith, like the 80s version of Adrian Smith. But because he was humble and he was selfless and he sacrificed basically putting himself in the spotlight to have Adrian come back, he very well could have said, well, if Adrian comes back, I'm leaving. He didn't do that. He was like, I want to stay. I like it here. I want to progress. I want us to be something that the world has never seen before. And that's what happened. And another credit to Yan is he's a very educated man. He has degrees. He has a degree in sociology and British literature. And what does Iron Maiden write about a lot of? I mean, look at Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Yan wasn't even a part of that, but that's a huge part of English and British literature. So, and then when you see how their style has evolved, I'm sure he's incorporating a lot of pieces. And some of the songs I mentioned on Brave New World are part of it. One song on Brave New World that I love to see him play on to this day is in Blood Brothers, and it's not even his song. But the whole Book of the Dead thing, say a prayer on the Book of the Dead, when Bruce says it, and he raises the guitar up and he just does the interlude. That whole part, I mean, it's beautiful. Then he has this really nice controlled solo. So he can play. Most of the time he is wild, 90% of the time, but he can play very melodic, very soft, and very intricate, just like the other guys. But he has a certain place in the band, and that's where he fits. But watch that Blood Brothers solo if you get a chance on the Rock and Rio DVD, or listen to the album when it gets to that point. You can hear the 3 guitarists incorporating their own pieces. And that's what I love about the reunion stuff forward, is that you get 3 different distinct sounds from the guys, which is awesome. Brave New World's an example. Moving on to Dance of Death. I mean, Yan helped write the title track of that record. And it's very minstrelly at the beginning, the way it's played. Now, Yan usually plays Stratocasters. Those are his guitars of choice, right? But at the end of the day, he's endorsed by Sandberg Guitars, and he has a lot of copies now that look kind of like Strats. He also sometimes plays an acoustic Gibson for the softer stuff, which a lot of the guys do. But electric stuff, he usually only plays Strats, Fender Strats, and the Sandbergs. Yeah, and kind of touching some more on that guitar thing with Yan, it's electric stuff, like, it's cool to see because he really only plays Strats, and then those Sandbergs he's endorsed by that they're Strat copies, right? They're Stratocaster copies, and they look just like his. He has a black Stratocaster with some of the finish, rubbed off on it, where you can see it. That's the one he plays the most. Usually, he plays that 95% of a show. That was given to him allegedly by Ian Gillan, the singer from Deep Purple. So, because he played with Ian and Ian's band, so it's very, very cool that he has that guitar. And what a touchstone to Deep Purple and his influence, Richie Blackmore and those guys. But again, going back to Roy Gallagher and going back to Jeff Beck, they're Strat guys too. So it makes sense why he sticks to the Strat and why he loves it. Davey was a big, heavy Strat guy too for a long time. Adrian was the one who was more experimental throughout his career. He was the one who was playing a bunch of different stuff even back in the 80s. Dave did a little bit too, but for the most part, he was playing the Strats or Strat copies. And then in recent memory, really since the Final Frontier, Dave and Adrian had been kind of alternating between a lot of different stuff. Les Pauls, Strats, different guitars. Adrian has played V's and the double neck Jacksons, and he's endorsed by Jackson Guitars now. Davey has a signature Strat, but Davey in general has stepped up and played a lot more Les Pauls in recent memory that I've seen. And then really, since the reunion, they've stepped up and kind of played a lot more acoustic-y, passagey stuff in some of the songs. Like I mentioned, Dance of Death. On this record, too, Yan helped write Montsegur. Another really cool song. So Another thing about Yan that you're going to see going forward here is like Montsegur is like this really kind of heavier, shorter to middle pace song, and then Dance of Death is an epic. And since the reunion, that's kind of what Yan's place has been for the Dance of Death record, A Matter of Life and Death, Final Frontier, Book of Souls, and Senjutsu. So moving forward from Dance of Death, you have, like I said, Montsegur, Dance of Death, the really short rocker, and then this epic. And then when you go to the next record, when you go to Matter of Life and Death, Yan has The Pilgrim and the closing track, The Legacy. And The Legacy is one of my favorite Iron Maiden songs. And this is really, again, what I said before in the beginning of the podcast episode that cemented Yan for me as like, I accepted him, quote unquote, kind of looking back on A Matter of Life and Death after the Final Frontier came out. Like, this guy kicks ass. Like, he's just as good. This is my band, the six piece. They're all amazing. They're all equally amazing. And then trying to play Yan's parts and trying to play certain sections of songs. But, man, when I sit here and I even just think about that, the first record that got me into the band, A Matter of Life and Death, and I wouldn't have The Legacy, or we as Maiden fans wouldn't have the song The Legacy without Yan's input in that. And the haunting intro at the beginning and the acoustic sound that Yan is so expertly great at. You look at that, and then you look at Dance of Death, and you compare even parts of, even going back to some of the earlier stuff that he was experimenting on with, like Fear of the Dark and things like that. Look at that. It's like the slow passages in the song Fear of the Dark. That's what he brings to the band. He refined it, he perfected it, and that's what he has done really from the reunion forward. And in particular, Dance of Death moving forward, he's done, like I said, like a short to middle range rocker, like a nice quicker song, a nice energy filled wild song, because that's who Yan is. Like, think about Montsegur, super fast, really energy filled, but then Dance of Death has that slow minstrelly epic-y sound, and then it picks up and it builds, and everybody has a wild solo in that. And Yan's solo in Dance of Death is absolutely amazing. But again, all the guitar players' solos in that song are amazing. They all get a solo. And I know we're on A Matter of Life and Death now, but same thing with that. The Pilgrim. The riff in that is a really upbeat, fast. Wow, it's Yan. The character is Yan. A wild, faster song. An up-tempo song. And then, again, he has that really nice intro with The Legacy, but then again that builds and builds and builds and turns into an epic, and it incorporates the whole band, and everybody has a solo. And lyrically, that's my favorite Iron Maiden song of all time, The Legacy. I just think it's every single word in that song is perfect. The music is perfect. It's one of my favorite Iron Maiden songs of all time. Moving on from Matter of Life and Death and going into Final Frontier, again, it's his trademark now. A nice up-tempo, short to middle range song, and then just an amazing, minstrelly sounding, evolving, dynamic epic. So he has, on the Final Frontier, The Alchemist, very up-tempo, quick, like a really nice song to throw in. And then he has, at the end of the album, The Talisman, which starts off real slow and melodic and just grows and builds and turns into this absolutely phenomenal masterpiece of a song where everybody gets a chance to shine. And I'll go back to what I said before about Yan. That's where he puts, himself aside to a certain extent and incorporates a lot of songs that are like co-wrote by Yan with other people. They showcase the rest of the guys just as much. And that's awesome. That's a quality for him to have, that he shares that with everybody. Even though he's doing like a lot of the more intricate like beginnings and the intro riffs and part of the melodies, the rest of the guys get a chance to incorporate their stuff too, and just it's beautiful. And he helps create that with who he's writing with, usually Steve. But again, there's another example. So far, this is why Yan is so amazing. That's what he brings from the reunion forward. I said it again. Just even going back to Brave New World, he has 4 writing credits on that, but Ghost of the Navigator is a nice heavier song, but it's faster, it's upbeat, but it's like a middle ranger. It's a nice tempo, really solid. Then he has The Mercenary, which is super fast in your face, wowed. Then he has Dream of Mirrors, which is a nice, more ambient, slower song that builds and gets bigger and becomes this gargantuan song. And then he has Alice on Planet, which is much like, Dream of Mirrors. It's a very, very heavy or gut punching driving song. And then he kind of took what he did with Brave New World and then kind of wrote less as his career progressed or as Maiden's career progressed, but that's kind of what he is now. One short one, or middle ranger, fast up tempo, and then an epic on every album. So we were at Final Frontier with that. Now same thing, go to Book of Souls. And you look at Book of Souls to see what he did on that album and how he helped write songs on that. You go through the list of that, it's the same thing. He has the title track, The Book of Souls, starts off nice and acoustic-y with it, and then into the heaviness and the gargantuan thing where everybody has a solo and they all do crazy stuff. And then he has a decent middle-range rocker in Shadows of the Valley, which is a really good song. It's very, very interesting. And Matt and I have said this before. At the beginning, kind of sounds a little Wasted Years-y sounding. It's almost like maybe, is that his tribute to H? I don't know. Could be. Tribute to H? Adrian? Very well could be. Interesting if it is. And then if you look at Senjutsu and look at that record to see what he contributes to that, again, he has his nice, short, fast song in Stratego, which is an amazing song. It was a single. And then his other contribution is The Time Machine, which is little bit of a middle range to longer song. But Steve really shined on Senjutsu. I mean, he has 4 just solo written songs on that. And that, I think that's the credit of Yan, though, and what he does. Now, solo-wise, like I said, his solos that he does have some really distinct ones throughout all those albums I mentioned and all those songs that I said he helped write. Some of his strongest stuff, in my opinion, is on Brave New World. Like Ghost of the Navigator is amazing. Dream of Mirrors is unbelievable. Blood Brothers, even though that's not one of the songs he wrote, like just how he plays that melody part. And that's another thing about Yan that he brings to the table. He's willing to do stuff on other people's songs that are just where he kind of adds this live dimension to it. Like when he plays that Blood Brothers thing, he's holding the guitar straight up in the air and he's playing the solo, and it's just, and he's the only guy who really does that, and to his credit, he's a showman. He's a showman, much like Bruce is. You don't really see Adrian and Davey holding their guitars, straight up in the air, playing behind their head or whipping them around their body. You don't see them doing that. You don't see them jumping around and running around and prancing and dancing and taking their whammy bar and, pushing it up against their Marshalls and stuff like that, or their stacks, or, the parts of the stage set. You don't see them doing that. They may occasionally fight with Eddie when he comes out and stuff like that, but for the most part, they're focused on their stuff. And Yan brings that showmanship, and he brings that flair. And then in terms of like his instrumentation and how he plays, he brings that, really from the reunion forward again, the ability to write a nice, short to middle range song that's like in your face, very fast and very wild, but then also the ability towards the end of the record to create a very a song that just builds from a very slow intro that grows and grows and grows and just gets more progressive as it goes and turns into this absolutely all-encompassing track. And that's what Yan brings. And I mean, if you're going back and you're listening to the previous podcast episode I did about Dave, you can see the differences between the guitarists just in how I'm speaking about it. And I'm not saying that, I'm 100% correct. This is just my opinion. This is what I've observed over 20 plus years of being a Maiden fan, doing my research, seeing them live 10 times, watching all their concert videos and documentaries umpteen times. I couldn't even tell you how many times. Getting on YouTube and watching concerts that, fans have filmed around the world. I mean, I'm sitting here watching full concerts and going back and watching some shows that I've been to, that people have recorded, that I've been at, my own recordings and stuff that I've done. And, I'll say this is, a podcast that Matt and I created, and I'm a fan of our podcast. I'm a fan of the episodes that I've done. I'll go back and listen to them myself and be like, what did I say? How can I expand upon that? What did I do? And that's what this is about. It's about expressing that. And that's why this is a matter of life and Maiden. But again, Yan is unbelievable. He's a huge part of this band. He has many, many highlights throughout his trajectory in the band. And I apologize to Yan. I guess I'll take this opportunity now to apologize if he ever listens to this episode. Yan, I apologize, and I think I can speak for Matt and say that he apologizes as well for our naivety when we were younger and saying that you weren't a big part of this band, because you've proven us wrong time and time again. We love you. We love you just as much as Davey and everybody else, and Age and Nico and Bruce and Steve and everybody. You're just as a part. So we apologize and we love you. And we think you're amazing. So I'm very excited to see what the Run for Your Lives tour has in store for us. I'm hoping we get a new album at some point after that's over, maybe 2027, maybe 2026. And then after that, it would be cool, because here's another thing. We get another album. That would be their 18th studio album. They're playing their first 9 albums, right? If you split it in half, they're playing their first 9 albums, Iron Maiden and Fear of the Dark, on the Run for Your Lives tour, 2025 and 2026. Let's say in 2026 we get a new album, and that's their 18th. Then they're going to tour for 2 years and say they're going to play everything post Fear of the Dark. So X Factor up to the new one that they'll have recorded. So we could see a set with that. So you split it in half. 9 albums in the front, 9 albums in the back, and that's it. It's like golf, right? It's like 18 holes. 18 holes. It's like golf. We're gonna do the first 9. We're gonna do the second 9. That's the way I see it. So we'll see what happens. But anyway, guys, I appreciate you tuning in and listening to A Matter of Life and Maiden, the podcast of the Beast. Happy birthday again, Yan. I hope you have a great day. Everybody take care of yourselves out there. Up the irons. Remember, Maiden is life. The rest is history. I'll see everybody next time.